You call yourself disciplined. You've got the mornings you showed up, the workouts you didn't skip, the deadlines you hit. And somewhere along the way, you built an identity out of it. I'm a disciplined person. It sits comfortably in your head. It sounds good when you say it out loud, but identity and evidence are two different things. And tonight we're going to hold them side by side. Because most people who believe they're disciplined have simply never been tested. They've built a life so comfortable, so free of resistance, that discipline was never actually required of them. And comfort has a strange way of disguising itself as strength, right up until the day it doesn't. Right up until the day life applies real pressure, and the whole structure buckles. And they can't understand why. Because on paper, on their own account of themselves, they were always the disciplined one. I'm not here to make you feel small tonight. I'm here to make you honest. There's a difference between tearing yourself down and telling yourself the truth. One leaves you smaller. The other is the only door that leads anywhere better. So here are 10 signs, 10 mirrors, really. And I'll be straight with you now. Some of these are going to sting. Good. That sting is not an insult. It's information. It's your own mind quietly confirming something you already suspected but never said out loud. Sit with it instead of running from it. Because underneath every single one of these 10 signs is the same simple, uncomfortable idea. Discipline isn't what you feel. It's not even what you say about yourself at dinner parties. It's what you do, specifically, in the moments when the feeling is completely gone and nobody would ever know the difference either way. If you've ever wondered why some people hold the line for years and others fall off it within a month, this is the video that answers that question, honestly. Without the motivational fluff that sends you away feeling good for an afternoon and changes nothing by the weekend. Because that's the trap most content about discipline falls into. It makes you feel inspired for 20 minutes and leaves you exactly where you started, with nothing actually different about how you'll behave tomorrow morning. That's not what we're doing here. We're going to name the specific patterns, one at a time, so that by the end of this, you have something concrete to work with instead of just a temporary feeling of resolve. Write down which of these 10 hits you the hardest. I want to know, and I read every single comment, because this only works if it's a conversation and not a lecture. And before we get into the list itself, understand what this actually is. It's not a report card. Nobody's grading you here. And there's no final score waiting at the end that determines whether you're allowed to call yourself a disciplined person. It's a diagnostic, a way of quietly locating exactly where the gap lives between the story you tell about yourself and the standard you actually hold day to day. So you can go to work on that specific gap instead of vaguely trying to be more disciplined in a way that never quite translates into anything real. Sign 1. You need to feel motivated before you move. This sounds harmless enough, doesn't it? Everybody likes to feel ready before they start something. Nobody wants to drag themselves into a task feeling flat and joyless. But look closer at what that habit is actually doing underneath the surface. It hands the controls of your entire life over to something you cannot govern. Moods are weather. They roll in uninvited. They roll out on their own schedule. And if your action depends on the forecast, you will spend your whole life waiting for a clear sky that may never come on the day you actually need it. The people who quietly get things done year after year didn't discover some secret trick for feeling motivated every single morning. Nobody has that secret. It doesn't exist. What they discovered instead is that the feeling doesn't have to arrive first. You act. Flat, tired, uninspired, half convinced the whole thing is pointless. And the motivation shows up afterward, almost embarrassed that it wasn't there to begin with. That's the entire secret. And it's so simple that most people refuse to believe it applies to them. They think their situation is different. Their tiredness is different. Their lack of motivation this particular morning is somehow more legitimate than everyone else's. It never is. Think about how many times you've said quietly to yourself, "I'll get to it when I'm in the right headspace." How many times has that sentence felt completely reasonable in the moment, even wise? That's exactly how the trap works. It never announces itself as weakness. It shows up dressed as self-care, as listening to your body, as being smart about your energy. Here's the test, and you can run it tonight if you want proof. Go do the thing you don't feel like doing. Not tomorrow, when you'll supposedly feel better. Right now, flat, tired, with zero enthusiasm. Do it badly if you have to, but do it. And notice, on the other side of it, that the feeling you were waiting for shows up anyway. A little late, a little sheepish, but there. It was never ahead of the action. It was always following behind it, waiting for you to move first. Sign 2. You're sharp in public and sloppy in private. This is the one that quietly separates character from performance. And it cuts a little deeper than the first sign because it exposes something most people would rather not look at directly. Plenty of people show up polished the moment there's an audience. They hit the deadline when the boss is watching. They train hard when someone's counting reps. They speak with real conviction in the meeting, in the group chat, on the stage. Then the door closes, the lights go off, the witnesses disappear, and the standard quietly collapses into something unrecognizable. That's not discipline. That's image management, and it's a very different skill. It looks similar from the outside, which is exactly why it fools almost everyone. Coworkers, friends, sometimes even a spouse. But here's the uncomfortable part. It can't fool the one person who actually matters, which is you. Deep down, in the quiet, you know the difference between what you show the world and what you actually are when nobody's grading the performance. And that knowledge doesn't stay comfortably buried. It surfaces eventually. In your health, in your finances, in the tired way you carry yourself, even on days when everything looks fine on the surface. Life audits you, whether you invite the audit or not, and the gap between your public face and your private habits doesn't stay quiet forever. It compounds, silently, until one day it shows up as a result you can't explain away. The real fix here is simple to say and genuinely hard to live, which is why so few people actually do it. Make the private standard the real standard. Make your bed when you live completely alone and nobody will ever see it unmade. Keep the promise to yourself that breaking would cost you nothing and earn you no sympathy either way. Do it right precisely because no one's watching, not despite that fact. When you flip the order, when the private standard becomes the real one and the public performance becomes simply an honest reflection of it, something remarkable happens. You stop being two different people wearing one name. You become integrated, whole. The same person in the dark as you are in the light. And once that happens, you stop needing to perform at all because there's nothing left to hide. Sign 3. You confuse being busy with being disciplined. This one wears a very convincing disguise because busyness feels like virtue from the inside. You're in motion from the moment you wake up. You're checking things off a list all day long. You're exhausted by 9 at night. And that exhaustion feels like proof. Proof that you worked hard. Proof that you were disciplined. Proof that today counted for something. But motion and progress are not the same thing. And busyness is often the most sophisticated, most socially acceptable form of procrastination there is. It lets you feel productive while you quietly avoid the one task that would actually move something forward. You answer the easy emails so you don't have to sit down and write the hard proposal. You reorganize your desk so you don't have to face the discomfort of the real work waiting underneath the clutter. And every bit of it feels like effort. That's exactly what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like diligence. The disciplined person, the real one, usually isn't the busiest one in the room. Often they're the calmest because they've learned to tell the difference between activity and actual progress. They know that 10 focused minutes spent on the one thing that matters beats 3 hours of frantic motion spent on everything that doesn't. They protect their energy the way you'd protect anything valuable. They say no to the noise before the noise even finishes its sentence. They aim before they fire, instead of firing in every direction and calling the smoke productivity. So stop asking yourself, at the end of the day, whether you were busy. That question is useless. The answer is always yes, every single time, for everyone. Ask a harder question instead. Did you do the thing that scared you? The task you've been quietly avoiding for days, the one that if you finally completed it would make everything else easier or completely unnecessary? If the answer is no, then all that motion, all that checking off, all that exhaustion was just wheels spinning in the sand. It felt like discipline. It wasn't. But here's what nobody tells you about these first 3 signs. They're the easy ones to spot once you know to look for them. They're the surface. What's underneath is a pattern that's been quietly running your entire life without ever asking your permission. And once you actually see it clearly, you can't unsee it. It changes how you read every single day that comes after this one. Sign 4. You can start, but you can't finish. Starting feels wonderful, and there's a good reason for that. It comes with a clean slate, fresh energy, that particular kind of hope that only exists on day 1 of something new. Day 2, still pretty good. But somewhere around day 9, day 14, day 20, the novelty drains out of it. And that's exactly where most people quietly vanish, without ever officially admitting they quit. Discipline was never really about the start. Anyone can start. The graveyard of good intentions is absolutely packed with beautiful beginnings that never went anywhere. Discipline lives in the middle, in the boring stretch. In the part where the excitement is gone and the results haven't shown up yet. And you're simply grinding through the gap between hope and proof with nothing but your own word to yourself keeping you there. You have to get honest about your own pattern here. How many things have you started this year? And how many did you actually see all the way through? Count them, if you're brave enough. The book's half read. The plan's half built. The habits that lasted exactly 1 week before quietly disappearing from your routine. Each one felt like real commitment in the moment it began. But a long string of abandoned beginnings isn't ambition, and it isn't even bad luck. It's a habit of quitting, wearing fresh clothes every few weeks so it never quite looks like what it actually is. The person who finishes things is playing an entirely different game. They don't start 10 projects at once, hoping momentum carries a few of them across the line. They start one, and they close it, because they understand something most people never quite grasp. A small thing completed builds more real strength than a big thing abandoned. Finishing teaches your own identity, something that starting never can. It teaches you that when you say you'll do a thing, you actually do it, all the way to the end, regardless of how the middle felt. And that belief about yourself is worth more than almost any single result you could point to. Sign 5. You renegotiate with yourself. This is the quiet one. It doesn't feel like breaking a promise in the moment. It feels reasonable, even smart. You set the plan the night before. Wake up at 5, train for an hour. Then 5 o'clock actually arrives, and you're tired. And a voice tells you that 6 is basically the same thing, and 45 minutes is plenty anyway. And you feel completely fine about it. Flexible, adaptive, wise even. But watch closely what just happened underneath that reasonable sounding thought. You made an agreement with yourself. And then you sat down at your own negotiating table and talked yourself down from it. And here's the thing about that particular habit. It never stays contained to one decision. Once you learn, at a deep level, that your commitments to yourself are negotiable, everything eventually becomes negotiable. The entire structure softens, and soon you can't fully trust a single thing you tell yourself, because your own track record quietly whispers that you'll bargain your way out whenever it gets uncomfortable enough. The disciplined person closes the negotiation permanently, and they do it in advance. When the alarm goes off, there's no committee meeting convened to debate the merits of getting up. There's no internal debate at all, because the decision was already made the night before, by a clearer, stronger version of themselves. The morning isn't the time to decide anything. It's simply the time to execute what was already decided. They've learned, often the hard way, that the tired, half-awake version of a person has no business voting on commitments the strong, clear-headed version already settled. That's the trick almost nobody learns early enough. You make the decision once, in advance, while you're strong, and then you refuse to reopen it later, when you're weak, no matter how reasonable the excuse sounds in that particular moment. Because the moment of action was never meant to be the moment of decision. If you're still deciding whether to do the thing right as it's time to do it, you've already lost that round. Because the weak moment will always find a perfectly reasonable excuse. It's had years of practice at exactly that. Sign 6. Your discipline depends on your circumstances. This might be one of the biggest illusions people carry about themselves. A lot of people are only disciplined when conditions happen to be perfect. When they slept well. When the schedule is clear. When the stress is low and everything has lined up in their favor. Under those conditions, sure, they perform beautifully, and they quietly credit their own character for it. But that's not discipline. That's just good luck that hasn't run out yet. mistaken for strength. Real discipline is built for the storm, not the calm. It's the standard you hold when you slept 4 hours instead of 8. When you're traveling and the whole routine is thrown off. When the plan got blown up unexpectedly and the day went sideways, and everyone around you would understand completely if you let the standard slide. Because every excuse available to you would sound completely legitimate to anyone listening. Anybody can hold the line when holding it costs nothing. The real question is what you do when it costs something. Life doesn't consult your calendar before it throws chaos at you. It doesn't wait for the ideal week to hand you the sick kid, the flat tire, the emergency that eats your entire morning before you've even had coffee. And the person whose discipline is entirely conditional on things going smoothly folds every single time something doesn't. They keep waiting for the perfect week that supposedly justifies finally getting serious. And that week never comes, because that isn't how weeks work. The disciplined person, instead, trains specifically for the imperfect day. They've got a 10-minute version of the workout for when the full hour isn't available. They've got a way to hold on to the essential core of the standard, even when everything around it falls apart, because they've made their discipline portable, independent of weather, mood, location, and circumstance. So stop waiting for perfect conditions to show up before you commit fully. Build a floor instead. A minimum standard so small and so achievable that it survives your worst possible day. Something you can still do, sick, tired, traveling, and completely out of energy. And never drop below that floor, no matter what the day throws at you, because the streak matters far more than the size of any single day's effort. The person who holds a small standard through the actual storm ends up far stronger than the one who only holds a big standard when the sun is shining and nothing is being asked of them. Sign 7. You need to be reminded. Sit with this one for a moment, because it exposes something people rarely admit out loud, even to themselves. You rely on the alarm, the accountability partner, the person checking in, the outside pressure that pushes you into motion. And when that support is present, you perform. But take it away. Remove the reminders, the check-ins, the outside eyes watching for you. And the whole thing goes quiet almost immediately. There's nothing inherently wrong with support. Support is genuinely good, especially early on. But there's a real and important difference between using support to help build a habit and needing that same support just to keep the habit alive at all. If you can't do the thing without a constant external push, then in an important sense, it was never really yours to begin with. It belonged to whoever was pushing you. You were riding their discipline, borrowing it. And the day they stopped pushing, you simply stopped moving, because the engine was never actually inside you. The disciplined person carries the standard internally. They don't need to be reminded who they are or what they committed to, because the reminder has been built into their own identity over time. They wake up already knowing, without needing anyone to hold them accountable, because they hold themselves accountable. And that internal judge is far harder to fool and far harder to escape than any external one could ever be. The whole journey is really about graduating, using the scaffolding early. Absolutely. Use the alarm, use the partner, use whatever structure helps in the beginning. But the actual goal is internalizing it completely. Reaching the point where the standard lives inside you so deeply that you'd still do the thing, even if every reminder in the world quietly disappeared tomorrow, even if no one was ever coming to check. And that brings us to something most people never say out loud, because it ties directly into everything that follows. The sign that, once you see it clearly, changes how the entire list reads. Sign 8. You're disciplined in one area and completely undisciplined in another. And you use the first to hide from the second. This is one of the most common games people quietly play with themselves. The person with the incredible work ethic who cannot control what they eat. The one who trains their body relentlessly but lets their finances quietly fall apart in the background. The one who is rigid and precise about their morning routine but chaotic in every relationship they touch. And here's the trick they play, usually without even noticing they're doing it. They point to the one area where they genuinely excel, and they use it as proof of overall character. Look how disciplined I am with my work. They tell themselves. And they let that one shining example cast a long shadow over every other place where things are quietly falling apart. That's not discipline. That's selective attention, dressed up to look like something more solid. Discipline was never meant to be a trophy you win once in one arena and get to display forever after. It's a way of living that either runs consistently through your whole life, or it reveals its own limits right at the edges, in the rooms you've quietly agreed never to look into directly. The areas you avoid, the domains you never examine honestly. Those aren't accidents. Those are exactly where the real work is waiting, behind a door you've kept shut, because some part of you already knows what's on the other side of it. The truly disciplined person doesn't get to hide behind their strengths indefinitely. They go looking for their weak spots on purpose, uncomfortable as that search is. They ask themselves directly, where am I soft? Where have I quietly decided the standard doesn't apply to me? And then they walk straight into that room, because they understand that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and the strong links don't compensate for the weak one. They just make its eventual failure more surprising when it finally comes. So take honest inventory. All of it. Not just the highlight reel you'd show someone else. The body, the money, the work, the relationships, the mind, the spirit. Find the area you've been quietly avoiding. The one you flinched at just now, reading this list. That's the one that needs your attention next. Not because the strong areas don't matter, but because a life built on one pillar of discipline, standing over a foundation of avoidance everywhere else, is a life waiting patiently to tip over. Sign 9. You quit the moment it stops feeling good. This is probably the great misunderstanding of our particular moment in time. People have quietly absorbed the idea that discipline is supposed to feel good all the way through, and that if something is hard, if it hurts, if real resistance shows up, that must mean something has gone wrong. So the instant difficulty appears, they take it as a signal to stop, and they call that listening to themselves. But it isn't wisdom. It's surrender, simply wearing a nicer name. Discomfort is not a signal to quit. Discomfort is the fee. It's the price of admission to almost everything actually worth having in a life. The resistance you feel in that moment isn't evidence that the plan is failing. It's usually the exact opposite. It's the plan working, right at the precise moment where growth genuinely happens. And the person who quits the instant the hurt begins never gets to see what's waiting on the other side of it. They spend their whole life turning back right at the threshold, mistaking the doorway for a wall. You have to make peace with feeling bad and doing the thing anyway. That's really the whole shift required here, not learning to enjoy the hard part. You don't have to enjoy it. And pretending otherwise is its own kind of dishonesty. Just refusing to let the absence of enjoyment become your excuse to quit. The disciplined person feels the exact same discomfort everyone else feels. Their nerve endings work perfectly fine. They simply don't obey the signal the way most people do. They feel the burn and keep going anyway. They feel the boredom and stay in the seat anyway. They feel the resistance and push straight through the middle of it because they've learned the truth about how anything worthwhile actually gets built. It gets built in the stretch where it stops feeling good and hasn't yet started paying off. That's the valley everyone has to cross, and most people standing in it decide it isn't working and quietly turn around. The disciplined person keeps walking because they've learned to trust the process past the point where feeling supports it. And they've learned that feelings are close to the last thing you should consult once the work actually gets hard. Sign 10. And this is the one that quietly runs underneath every other sign on this list. You talk about discipline more than you actually practice it. I want to be gentle here, because this one lives close to home for nearly everybody, including people who consider themselves fairly self-aware. It's easy to love the idea of discipline, to admire it from a distance, read about it, talk about it with friends, plan elaborately around it, promise it to yourself and to others. It feels good to talk about the person you're going to become. It almost feels like becoming them in the moment you're describing it. But it isn't, because there's a strange, quiet comfort available in preparation that never actually becomes action. You gather the tools. You make the plan. You buy the equipment. You announce the goal to people who care about you and offer encouragement. And all of that activity gives you the sensation of real progress without any of the actual cost attached to it. You get to feel like a disciplined person while safely avoiding the one thing a disciplined person actually does. The quiet work, done without an audience, especially when it's hard. Talking becomes a substitute for doing, And the real danger is that talking about it can genuinely satisfy the very hunger that would otherwise have driven you to act. You announce the goal, receive the encouragement, and something inside you quietly relaxes, as though you'd already accomplished something. But you haven't. You've simply spent the fuel that was meant to power the actual work on the pleasure of describing it out loud instead. The louder someone talks about their discipline, the more worth watching their hands rather than their mouth. The truly disciplined person is very often the quietest one in the room. They're not describing the standard to anyone. They're simply living it, day after unremarkable day. And they don't need to tell you about the work because the work speaks for itself eventually. In their results, in their calm, in the steady way they carry themselves through both good weeks and difficult ones. They've learned, somewhere along the way, that the energy spent talking about who you're going to be is energy quietly stolen from the process of actually becoming that person. So close your mouth a little more and open your hands. Stop announcing and start doing. Let the results do the talking on your behalf. And here's what you'll find waiting on the other side of that shift. There's a genuine power in the silence. When you stop broadcasting your intentions to everyone around you and simply live them instead, something shifts quietly inside you. You stop performing discipline for an audience and start building it privately for yourself. And that private, unannounced work becomes the foundation everything else in your life eventually stands on. So there they are, 10 signs. 10 mirrors, really, held up one at a time. And if you were honest while reading through them, genuinely honest, more than one of them probably found you tonight. Maybe several did. I want to tell you plainly what that means, because it's easy to misread. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're weak or behind or somehow less capable than the people who seem to have it together. It means you can finally see clearly, and seeing clearly is where all real change actually begins. You cannot fix what you refuse to name honestly. The person who already believes they're fully disciplined has nowhere left to grow. They've closed the door on the whole conversation. They're defending an image of themselves instead of quietly building an actual life. But the person who can look at these 10 signs and say, honestly, that's me. And that one too. That person has just been handed their entire map. Every place they flinched while reading is a place worth working on. Every uncomfortable sting is a starting line, not a verdict. And here's the freedom hiding inside all of this. You don't have to fix all 10 of these tonight. You don't need to become a perfectly disciplined person by tomorrow morning. And honestly, nobody ever fully does. You just have to pick one. The one that landed hardest. The one you're still turning over in your mind right now. And go to work on that single one, quietly, without announcing it to anyone, without waiting until you feel ready, without renegotiating the terms, without needing a reminder from someone else, without quitting the moment it stops feeling good. Because that's genuinely how it gets built. Not in one dramatic burst of willpower. Not in a single breakthrough moment you can point back to later. But in the slow, unglamorous, entirely private accumulation of ordinary days where you simply did the thing you said you would do, whether you felt like it that morning or not. One honest standard held quietly through the storm, without applause, and then another day like it, and then another, until one day, almost without noticing the shift, you realize you're not talking about discipline anymore. You're just living it. And on that day, you won't need to tell anyone you're disciplined. You won't even need to convince yourself of it in some internal pep talk. You won't need the reminder, or the audience, or the perfect conditions, or the good feeling showing up first. You'll simply be the kind of person who does what needs doing when it needs doing, regardless of how the day happens to feel. And that quiet, steady, unshakable person is already inside you right now, waiting patiently for you to stop talking and start. Here's one last thing worth sitting with before you go. Nobody arrives at that kind of steadiness in a straight line. You will renegotiate again at some point, even after reading all of this tonight. You will catch yourself hiding behind one strength while ignoring a weakness somewhere else. That's not proof this doesn't work. That's just what being human looks like along the way. The difference between the person who eventually gets there and the person who doesn't isn't the absence of these 10 signs showing up in their life from time to time. It's what they do the moment they notice one of them happening again. The disciplined person doesn't require themselves to be perfect. They just require themselves to notice quickly and correct quickly, without turning the slip into a reason to abandon the whole effort. A missed morning doesn't erase a month